biggest story.
You two black pieces of shit think you can ruin my kitchen? I'll fucking break you both.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
You'll be the one leaving.
Chef Richard Holloway. Richard is a white head chef with an air of superiority that borders on arrogance. He runs the kitchen with a strict, authoritarian hand, belittling and bullying those who are beneath him, especially those he feels are weaker. His behavior often crosses the line into racism, and he is known for making demeaning comments about the kitchen staff, particularly the black employees. To him, power and control are everything. Jasmine Carter, she a black woman who has worked her way up to become the CEO of the restaurant. However, she is undercover as a kitchen staff member, posing as just another employee to observe the operations and see the real state of things within the restaurant. She is strong, intelligent, and driven, but her true identity remains hidden. She's come to witness firsthand the abuse and to set things right. Molly Thompson. Molly is a black waitress who works alongside the kitchen staff. She's kind-hearted, a little shy, and genuinely cares for her colleagues, but she is terrified of Chef Richard. Molly sees the abuse happening in the kitchen but feels powerless to speak out against it. She often keeps her head down, not wanting to bring attention to herself, especially when Richard is around. In the kitchen, the atmosphere was far different. Chef Richard Holloway stood at the helm, barking orders at his staff. His voice was sharp, filled with authority that left no room for questions. His eyes scanned the kitchen with disdain, always looking for someone to pick on, someone to belittle. His temper was legendary, and his preference for using intimidation and fear to control the staff made it clear he thought himself untouchable. Among the kitchen staff was Jasmine Carter, a woman who had been working here for months. To the others, she was just another kitchen worker, quiet and competent, but nothing remarkable. What they didn't know was that Jasmine wasn't just any employee, she was the CEO of the restaurant, disguised in plain clothes to investigate the true state of her business. Nearby, Molly Thompson, a shy white waitress, moved between the dining room and kitchen with her usual nervous energy. She avoided making eye contact with Chef Holloway, knowing all too well the harsh words he could direct at her. Molly had seen enough of his outbursts, but she was too afraid to speak up, too afraid of what might happen if she did. As the night wore on, the tension in the kitchen grew. And unbeknownst to Chef Holloway, this evening would mark the beginning of his downfall. The kitchen at La Côte Royale was a pressure cooker of chaos. The rhythmic clattering of pots, the sizzling of hot oil, and the constant shuffle of feet as the staff moved between workstations created a constant hum. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, steady sound, adding to the tension in the air. Every inch of the kitchen was controlled, manic, and chaotic, with one clear force commanding the environment: Chef Richard Holloway. Chef Holloway stood near the front of the kitchen, his eyes sweeping over the bustling station with the sharpness of a hawk. His gaze was cold, calculating, always searching for mistakes, flaws, anything he could use to assert his dominance. Power was his only language, and the kitchen was his kingdom, where every chef, every cook, and every staff member existed solely to serve his whims. His reputation for cruelty was legendary, and those who worked under him had learned to fear him, to cower, to avoid his wrath at all costs. The tension in the room was palpable, but Jasmine Carter, who had been working silently at her station, watched everything closely. Her eyes moved across the kitchen, absorbing the toxic atmosphere that Chef Holloway had fostered. This wasn't just about cooking, this was about control, and Holloway reveled in it. He tore people down, one by one, until they were too broken to do anything but comply. Jasmine, however, had a mission. She wasn't like the others. She was the one who would change this. She'd heard the rumors about Chef Holloway, how he would belittle, humiliate, and break anyone who didn't meet his standards. She had seen how his presence alone made people shrink, how he preyed on their weaknesses. As Jasmine stood there, she felt the anger rise in her chest. She wasn't just here to observe, she was here to fix it. But she had to wait. She had to bide her time, stay in character, and watch this man slowly destroy everything he touched. The moment came when Chef Holloway raised his voice again, his sharp words cutting through the air. "Molly! Get over here!" Chef Holloway's voice boomed across the kitchen, freezing everyone in their tracks. Molly Thompson, a black waitress who had been working quietly near the door, jumped at the sound of his voice. Her heart pounded in her chest as she quickly placed the tray of drinks she had been carrying onto a nearby counter. Molly was a kind-hearted woman, but she had always kept her head down, especially when it came to Chef Holloway. She had seen what happened to those who drew his ire, and she wasn't about to make herself a target. "Yes, Chef?" Molly stammered, walking toward him, her steps hesitant. Chef Holloway's eyes narrowed as he inspected her with a disgusted look. He looked her up and down, his mouth curling into a sneer. He hated that she was here, hated that she had been hired. To him, she was nothing but another cog in the machine, and a worthless one at that. "You think you can just wander around here, don't you?" Chef Holloway snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. "What are you doing, huh? You think you're above this? You think you're better than the rest of us?" Molly lowered her eyes, her stomach twisting in knots. She knew where this was going. She had witnessed it before, how Chef Holloway picked apart his staff, one by one, until they were reduced to nothing. He was good at it. He was a master manipulator, and Molly was one of his favorite targets. "I was just checking on the drinks, Chef," Molly said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is going fine in the dining room." "Fine? Fine?" Chef Holloway exploded. His face turned crimson with anger, his fists clenched. "Do you think you can just stand there and tell me everything is fine? You're worthless," he shouted, his voice echoing throughout the kitchen. "You don't belong in this kitchen. Hell, you don't even belong in this restaurant." Molly's eyes stung with tears, but she didn't dare cry. She kept her head bowed, feeling the sting of his words deep in her chest. He had said worse before, but each time it felt like a personal attack, like a punch to the gut. He saw her as nothing, as less than human. And his behavior was only getting worse. Chef Holloway took a step forward, his hand suddenly shooting out to grab a plate off the counter. Without any warning, he spun around and, with all the strength he could muster, slammed the plate of food directly at Molly, the contents splattering across her shirt and face. The staff gasped in horror, some turning away to avoid witnessing the humiliation. Molly stood frozen, the food dripping from her clothes, her face red with both anger and shame. She felt the eyes of everyone on her, the shame, the humiliation, the complete disregard for her humanity in that moment. "Look at you!" Chef Holloway yelled, his laughter echoing through the kitchen. "You're nothing more than a servant, and that's all you'll ever be. You're so pathetic." Jasmine felt her blood boil at the sight of Molly standing there, her clothes ruined, humiliated in front of everyone. She had seen enough. The fire inside her finally ignited. "Richard, that's enough," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the tension. She stepped forward with purpose, her eyes never leaving Chef Holloway's. The room seemed to fall silent as everyone awaited his reaction. Chef Holloway turned to face her, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "And who the hell do you think you are? Who do you think you are, coming in here and trying to tell me how to run my kitchen? This is my domain, and you're just a nobody, standing around doing nothing," he sneered. "I'm not doing nothing," Jasmine said calmly, though her voice was laced with defiance. "I'm here to make sure that this place actually runs like a restaurant, not a circus. I'm here to make sure people like Molly are treated with respect. Something you clearly don't understand." Chef Holloway's face reddened with fury. He stepped closer to her, his towering figure casting a shadow over Jasmine. "You think you can lecture me?" he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "You don't know what it's like to run this place. You don't have the balls to do what needs to be done. You want to stand there and tell me how to treat my staff? You'll regret it." Jasmine stood her ground, refusing to flinch. "The only thing I regret is letting you get away with this for so long." The kitchen staff remained silent, none of them daring to speak up. Jasmine knew that they were all too afraid of Chef Holloway to intervene. She had seen it in their eyes, the fear, the helplessness. But not anymore. "Look at you," Chef Holloway spat. "You think you can talk to me like that? You're just another cog in the wheel, just another faceless employee. You think you're special? You're not." Jasmine's gaze was unwavering. "You're the one who's pathetic. All you do is tear people down. You think that's what makes you powerful? It's not. It just makes you a coward." Chef Holloway's eyes flickered with rage. He was used to breaking people, used to watching them shrink in fear. But this woman was different. And it made him furious. "You'll pay for this," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, filled with venom, but Jasmine didn't flinch. "You're the one who'll pay," she said quietly, her voice strong. "And it's going to happen sooner than you think." The air in the kitchen was thick with tension, the oppressive silence hanging like a storm cloud, waiting to burst. The staff watched from the corners of the room, eyes flicking between Jasmine and Chef Holloway. Every breath felt like it could ignite the situation. No one moved, no one dared to speak. The atmosphere had shifted, the usual anxiety that plagued the kitchen was replaced by an electric charge of anticipation. Chef Holloway was seething. His fury was palpable, his veins bulging as he glared at Jasmine, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had never been disrespected like this, not in all his years of commanding this kitchen. The rage bubbling inside him was something he couldn't control anymore. Jasmine had challenged everything he stood for, everything he believed in. And now, there was nothing he wanted more than to break her. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me what to do?" Chef Holloway hissed, taking a step toward her. His breath was hot and heavy with anger. "You think you can tell me how to run my kitchen?" His voice was a low growl now, thick with venom. "You don't know the first thing about what it takes to keep this place running." Jasmine stood her ground, her back straight, her eyes unwavering. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had already seen how Holloway broke people. His words, his actions, they were all designed to crush their spirit, to reduce them to nothing. She refused to let him do the same to her. She couldn't afford to back down. "I've seen enough," Jasmine said, her voice strong, yet quiet enough to carry over the room. "This place isn't about running a kitchen, it's about running people into the ground. And that stops now." Chef Holloway's eyes narrowed dangerously, and his face twisted with disbelief. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if trying to process the audacity of what she had just said. No one, not even the most senior chefs, had ever dared to speak to him like this. He was the king of this kitchen, the unquestioned leader. The rules of the restaurant bent to his will. You think I'm going to just let you walk out of here with your little speech about change? Holloway sneered, his voice dripping with mocking laughter. You don't belong here, you don't belong anywhere near a kitchen like this. You think you can just waltz in and change things? Let me remind you of your place. He advanced, the distance between them closing, his anger almost tangible. The heat of the kitchen seemed to rise with every step he took, his large form looming over her. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her expression a mixture of defiance and calm determination. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had suffered under his reign of terror in this kitchen. She was done being quiet. Done pretending she was just another employee. She was here to change things, no matter the cost. Don't you dare think I'm afraid of you, Jasmine said, her voice unwavering. You can't intimidate me. You can't break me. Her words were cutting, clear, a challenge to his very authority. Chef Holloway's eyes darkened with rage. Oh, I'm going to break you, he snarled. And when I'm done, you'll wish you never stepped foot in this kitchen. You'll be begging for mercy. Jasmine felt a cold chill run through her as he closed the final distance between them. His presence was overpowering, his anger contagious. But she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. She had already endured too much in her life to let someone like him stand in her way. You're not going to break me, she repeated, her voice now filled with an iron resolve. You've broken enough people. You've ruined enough lives. But I'm not like them. Chef Holloway's face contorted with fury, and in a flash, he swung his arm forward, knocking a nearby plate of food off the counter and sending it crashing to the ground. The sound was deafening, the sharp crack of porcelain echoing through the kitchen like the final straw breaking a tense silence, but he wasn't done. His rage had built up to a fever pitch, and he reached for another plate, this one still loaded with food, and hurled it directly at Jasmine. The plate shattered against her chest, its contents splattering across her clothes, her face, and the floor. Jasmine froze for a moment, feeling the cold remnants of the dish dripping down her skin. The shock of it sent a rush of anger through her, anger that surged, an overwhelming tide that pushed all fear aside, her hands clenched into fists. This man was trying to humiliate her, to reduce her to nothing. But he wasn't just humiliating her, he was humiliating everyone in this room. Everyone who had suffered under his cruelty, who had been broken by his words and actions. And she wasn't going to let him get away with it. The kitchen went silent. For a moment, no one moved. No one dared to breathe. They were all waiting for what would happen next. Would Jasmine cower? Would she break like all the others? Instead, Jasmine stood tall, wiping the remnants of food from her face and chest with steady hands. Her expression was unreadable, her body still. But inside, her heart raced. She could feel the anger burning inside her, and yet she remained calm. She couldn't let him see her break. She had to remain in control, even if only for a few more moments. You're finished, she said, her voice cold and unshaken. This ends now. Chef Holloway took a step back, his face still twisted with fury, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had expected to see her falter. To see her retreat, to apologize, to shrink back into the shadows. But instead, she stood there, unmoving, a force to be reckoned with. And that infuriated him more than anything else. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Holloway spat, his face inches from hers. "You think you can change this place? You're nothing. You're just another cog in the machine. I'll make sure you're out of here, and no one will even remember your name." Jasmine didn't flinch. "You're the one who'll be forgotten, Richard," she said, her words sharp and deliberate. "You're the one who will be remembered for all the wrong reasons." For a moment, the room was deathly silent. The staff had never seen anyone stand up to Chef Holloway like this before. No one had ever dared to challenge his authority. But Jasmine had. And she had taken it one step further by calling his bluff, and then, the twist came. "I'm not done here," Jasmine said, her voice low but powerful. "You're not the only one who's been in control for too long. This restaurant, you think it's yours, don't you? You think you're untouchable. Well, let me make one thing clear, I own this place." The words hit like a bombshell. Chef Holloway's eyes widened in shock, his face going pale as the realization hit him like a freight train. Jasmine wasn't just another worker. She wasn't just a temporary employee trying to make a difference. She was the CEO of the entire restaurant, the very one who had the power to end his reign of terror with a single word. You own this restaurant?" Chef Holloway stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "No, that can't be possible." Jasmine nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Yes. I've been here to witness firsthand the toxic environment you've created. I've seen how you treat people, how you break them down, and how you think you can get away with it. Well, not anymore." The room was silent as Chef Holloway stood there, frozen, unable to speak. His eyes darted around the kitchen, the once feared master now realizing that his power had been nothing more than an illusion. His control, his dominance, everything he had built was crumbling in an instant. "You're done, Richard," Jasmine said quietly, her voice firm. "And I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why." Chef Holloway stood there, utterly defeated, the full weight of Jasmine's words crashing down on him. He had spent his life bullying and belittling others, and now, it was his turn to face the consequences. His once steely confidence evaporating into a sea of disbelief. For the first time in his life, he realized that the power he'd built through fear and intimidation had failed him. Jasmine Carter, the woman he had tormented, had exposed his greatest weakness, not his temper, but his arrogance and sense of superiority. As the kitchen staff stood motionless, the realization sank in. Chef Holloway was no longer in control of the kitchen. Jasmine had taken the reins, and with a calm that betrayed her inner strength, she gave the order to have Chef Holloway escorted out of the restaurant. It was a slow, painful fall from grace for the man who had once ruled this space with ruthless force. The staff, still in shock, watched as Chef Holloway, now stripped of his authority, shuffled out the back door, his face pale and defeated. For a brief moment, the tension in the kitchen lifted. The silence was replaced with a feeling of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Molly, her heart still pounding from the chaos, looked up at Jasmine, the woman who had stood tall against the monster in the kitchen. The gratitude in her eyes spoke volumes. Jasmine had not only defended her, but she had also stood up for every worker who had been silenced by Holloway's cruelty. The kitchen staff slowly began to move again, unsure of what had just transpired, but the change was undeniable. With Holloway gone, there was space for something new, a chance to rebuild, to thrive, to work in an environment where respect was no longer a rare commodity. Jasmine, standing at the front of the kitchen, addressed the staff. We move forward from here, she said quietly. We work together. No one will be silenced. No one will be broken. This kitchen belongs to all of us. With those words, she walked out of the kitchen, her shoulders straight, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She had made a difference, not just in one kitchen, but for the countless others that had suffered at the hands of toxic leadership. The restaurant would never be the same. But now, it would be better. The fall of Chef Holloway is a powerful reminder that power built on fear is always temporary. Holloway used intimidation, racism, and humiliation to control his staff, believing that his authority was unquestionable. But Jasmine's intervention proved that true leadership comes not from domination, but from respect and understanding. This story highlights the dangers of toxic leadership, especially in environments where fear is used to control and suppress others. It's a call to action to recognize the value of every individual, regardless of their position, race, or background. Every person deserves respect in the workplace, and no one should have to endure humiliation or abuse to keep their job. In a world where power imbalances often create toxic environments, it's important to challenge those in positions of authority who abuse their power. Jasmine's courage in standing up to Chef Holloway reminds us that it's not just about challenging injustice for ourselves, but also for those who feel voiceless, those who are too afraid to speak out. The real lesson here is that it's not enough to just let people suffer silently. True leadership is about uplifting others, standing by them when they need support, and using one's position to bring about positive change. What do you think about Chef Holloway's abuse of power and the way Jasmine stood up to him? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a toxic leadership environment? How do you think we can create spaces where respect, understanding, and empathy lead the way instead of fear and control? Let's start a discussion in the comments below. Share your thoughts and experiences on toxic leadership and how we can work towards creating better, healthier environments for everyone.